could you explain to us a little bit about what are internet exchange points and how this kind of interconnection infrastructure affects global imbalances of power?
Okay. So internet exchange points are public spaces where internet networks interconnect to exchange traffic and routes. So imagine that Google, Facebook, AT&T, all these companies have what we call autonomous systems. Here I would talk about autonomous systems as networks, but under autonomous systems you can have many networks. And these networks need to physically interconnect for us to have the kind of communication that we have. So data packets go from one point to another on the internet. When you send a message, for example, that message will necessarily be divided into many pieces on the internet for them to go to different one destination, but commonly through different routes. It can go through different routes. So in this sense, the internet exchange points are points where these networks kind of physically interconnect to facilitate this traffic, to facilitate this idea of sending data packets from one point to another on the internet. Imagine that it would be much, much more difficult for many networks to interconnect among them without a central point where they can come, bring their infrastructure and interconnect there. So I would say these are kind of internet nodes that we have on the global internet infrastructure. And we have more than 600 in the world commonly. And in fact, when a country doesn't have an IXP, I will call in this way, internet exchange points are also known by IXPs. When a country doesn't have one IXP, so the networks of that country necessarily need to interconnect in another place. So they kind of go to other countries to do this kind of interconnection. In this sense, this affects a lot the price of the internet in a country, for example, commonly, but also it brings consequences in terms of where the data from that country that could be locally exchanged is going. So there is also the discussion about regulation, because when data from one country is going to another country, the laws of that country will will kind of have authority on that data and not the country where the citizen is. Can you understand that? So this kind of, this is one of the consequences and the problems that we could say affect power on the internet infrastructure.
And knowing that Brazil in the past has taken a more of a protagonist role in global internet governance, what do you think Brazil's role is in the governance of these interconnection infrastructures, or how can Brazil make a difference?
In fact, when we consider the whole IXP ecosystem, Brazil has an important role in terms of number of IXPs within the country. So in Brazil we have more than 30 IXPs, and they were built with the idea of development and sovereignty behind them. The idea was that if you have many IXPs in the country, so you kind of help networks from that very different regions to interconnect locally. And then this would facilitate the development of the internet. It would also increase the quality of the internet, because when you have IXPs close to where the networks are, the traffic will be much quicker to occur. So this would also help in the mind of the policymakers who built that ecosystem. This would also help to develop the internet in the Northeast, in the other regions, not only in the South. So this was in the beginning, the origin of the IXPs in Brazil. What happens though is that because of the concentration that we have on the layer, on the web layer, which means that we are more and more concentrating our interests in some companies, in some content, like Google, Facebook, Amazon in some sense, Apple. Because we have not so many companies that are the owners of the content that people demand, what is going on is that this where this content is influences where networks want to be. So if these companies, if this content is not in the Northeast, does not matter if there is an IXP there, because networks want this content. So what will happen is that they necessarily, even if there is IXP in some cities in the Northeast, networks from there are going to São Paulo to interconnect. So in this sense, I have answered to your question. While Brazil has an important ecosystem, it is it's the biggest public ecosystem of IXPs in the world. What not necessarily should understand that all IXPs in Brazil have the same power or have the same capacity of making the internet better and better, because if these companies that I mentioned, the content that end users want to access, are not cached, are not putting their content in these IXPs, so these networks will necessarily interconnect in other points. And some companies, just to give you a sense of what is happening, some companies in Bahia, for example, some networks, ISPs we call, Internet Service Providers, they are even interconnecting in Germany. Instead of they are going to São Paulo to interconnect, but they are also interconnecting in other countries, just because these companies, these content companies, are bringing their content to these other IXPs and not necessarily to the IXP in the northeast of Brazil. So these content companies have a lot of power to define how an IXP today will be like successful or not.